What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new RG28XX from Anbernic, and I gotta say, this has been one of the most exciting little handhelds that's released in a long time. This is something I've personally been having a lot of fun with, and it's really coming down to the form factor, size, and chipset they opted to use here with the RG28XX. This thing might be small, but it's actually packing quite a bit of power. And they are offering a couple different color variants over on their website. First things first, let's talk about the price. So launch price right now is $44, and I'd say this is an awesome little $45 device. This is their launch price, and it looks like right now they've got a $4 off coupon, so normal price on this is going to be around 48 bucks. And even right there under 50, I'd say that this would be an awesome little device if you know what you're getting into. And I did mention they will be offering this in a few different color variants. They've got that orange, gray, black transparent, and beige white. So obviously, we're working with a pretty small device. It's got a 2.8-inch display, but I really do like the size here. I think this is perfect for putting in your pocket. Now, I wouldn't make this my main device, but this is a great carry-around travel device that's totally capable of playing thousands and thousands of retro games. In fact, this can emulate N64, Atomiswave, Dreamcast, Naomi, and even some PSP games. I've also got the new RG35XX. This is the 2024 model. Of course, it's a vertical style handheld. I call these DMG style. But yeah, I mean, it's much larger than that 28XX. And if you're into these vertical style handhelds, this isn't bad. We do have much larger buttons. And as you can see, that D-pad is a lot bigger on that RG35. And when it comes to these RG devices, I personally think they've got some of the best D-pads out there when it comes to these retro handhelds. They've basically just kind of shrunk this down because even the D-pad on this, being so small, is very accurate, and I'm able to pull off all of my favorite special moves in fighting games. Up top here, we've got our shoulders and triggers. Obviously, with something this small, we're not going to get linear triggers, and we do kind of have to reach over for those shoulder buttons. But in reality, with a lot of the games we're going to be playing on this, we didn't need extra shoulder buttons. All of the face buttons here are using rubber membrane conductive pads underneath, so they feel pretty good, but they are shrunk down when you compare it to other handhelds. Even the A, B, X, and Y button are a bit smaller, but again, this is a very pocketable device. Taking a look around the RG28XX, down here we've got a 3.5mm audio jack and dual micro SD card slots. Base model will come with a 64GB card, and that's really all I've needed so far, but you can add up to a 512GB card to this unit. Over here on the left-hand side, we've got our volume rocker. Moving over to the right-hand side, reset button and our power button. And of course, up top, we've got our triggers, our shoulders, a mini HDMI port. This will output 720p, 60Hz. A menu button, some LED indicators for charging that battery up, and our USB Type-C port. When it comes to the specs of the RG28XX, this is using the all-winner H700, and we've seen this in several of their newer handheld devices like the RG35XX and so on and so on. It's actually a good performer. It's a quad-core A53 SoC up to 1.5 GHz. We've got a Mali G31 MP2 GPU, 1GB of LP DDR4 RAM, and the base model does come included with a 64GB micro SD card, and for my use, I haven't had to use any more storage than that, but you can opt to pick one up with a 128GB card for a little extra. We've got a 2.83 IPS display. It is fully laminated with a resolution of 640 by 480. Single front-facing mono speaker, a 3100 mAh battery, and they're claiming up to 8 hours of battery life out of this, and this is running their proprietary Linux that they've been using on their newer, smaller RG handhelds. So I wanted to give you a closer look at the operating system and settings. What I did was just plug this into my game capture with that mini HDMI port. It'll do 720p, 60Hz out, and it doesn't look bad scaled up on a larger screen. So obviously, we've got our game room, RetroArch, favorites, history, search. There are some apps here, and I know a lot of people aren't going to be using this, but we've got that music player, video, ebook. Over HDMI, I can't get the ebook feature working. It does work on the built-in screen, but I'm not sure how many people are going to use this anyway. Got a built-in file manager. And of course, we've got our settings. So just our battery gives us the voltage. We can set this from 1 minute up to 10 minutes or never reach that lock screen. Brightness, we've only got 5 levels here. It does get bright enough on that built-in display. I/O test, and I really do like this D-pad. It's actually pretty nice here. all of these buttons function properly, just so you can test everything out. Date and time, language, RetroArch settings. From here, we can reset that RetroArch config, icon settings, and this can be changed, but I gotta say, Style 2, the one that we're using, looks like this, is probably best suited for this display. We can go with these, but they're a bit small. You know, on larger screen devices, I kind of like setting this up with something like this, a little colorful, but I think that icon Style 2 works really well with this device. Background settings, you can swap the image out if you need to. Button sound, I've got mine turned off, does get a bit annoying when scrolling through everything. You can't change the sound itself, but you can completely disable it. We can clear that record, firmware, our light status, reboot, and shut down. So when it comes to a device like this, I mean, we've got a lot of settings here that we can mess around with, and especially if you want to get really into it, RetroArch is where it's going to be. So we've got a lot of cores here that work really well with this H700 chipset. One thing that I've noticed here is, you know, once we get up to around PSP, we start seeing stuff struggle. Now, there are PSP games that are playable here on this device, but I wouldn't buy it specifically for PSP emulation. This H700 handles Dreamcast way better than I ever thought it would, and there are thousands and thousands of games that are going to run flawlessly on this little device. But just keep in mind, I mean, once you get up there to N64 and PSP, there are a few games that may struggle on this chipset. Either way, we're looking at a really large selection of games that can be played on here. And even open bore, you can actually load up some really awesome open bore games if you wanted to. And overall, I think they've been doing a really good job getting this operating system fleshed out on this chipset. So again, we've got a couple devices powered by this same operating system and same chipset. I've had a little time to work on it. Really smooth on this little setup, and having it in this super portable form factor just makes it really nice to be able to kind of put this in your pocket, pull it out at any time, and start playing your favorite retro games. Really like the design they've come up with here. But the biggest reason somebody's going to even buy one of these is to game on it, so let's see how it handles that. So first up, we've got some Super Nintendo, one of my favorite games, Agani. If you've never played it, definitely try it out. It's a lot of fun. I'm using the standalone emulator we have built into this handheld, and the reason I'm using this instead of RetroArch is just to show you the settings that we have here. So with most of these standalones, pressing that menu button up top will obviously bring us into the menu. We can exit, we can save, we can load, and with most of these emulators, we'll have a video display effect. Right now we're in HD, but we can also add some scan lines. We've got two different scan line options. Go to fast mode, dot matrix, and right back to HD. It's really hard to come across on camera with these scan lines, but they do look pretty decent. But I'll tell you, since we're already working with such a small screen, I've been leaving everything in HD, and it does turn out really nicely on this 2.8-inch IPS. Scan lines would come in really handy if you had this connected over HDMI, and I want to give you a look at that so you can see them a bit better. So I just moved over to a brighter game, so it's a bit easier to see, and these scan lines will actually darken the built-in screen a bit. Scan line 1. And yeah, with HDMI out here, we can only do up to 720p. It doesn't look that bad. Moving over to scan lines 2, just a little bit of a different effect. We've also got a couple more options here, like fast, which kind of seems to smooth everything out. I personally love my pixels, and I'd love to see as many as possible, but it's a 2.8-inch display. This smooth doesn't look bad on the built-in screen. And the final one we have here is dot matrix. So you do have options here with these built-in emulators, and of course, when it comes to RetroArch, we've got all kinds of scan lines and different effects that we can add from within RetroArch, but I wanted to show you these standalones, everything that's built in. Checking out some Gameboy emulation on this device. Personally, I like using RetroArch because we can colorize this, and we want that DMG color, at least I want that DMG color. With the standalone emulator here, we just can't get it. It's going to be kind of black and white. But with RetroArch, not a problem to go ahead and colorize this. Give us that pea green look. And I think it looks great on this display. And of course, Gameboy is going to work flawlessly on this thing. I mean, if you wanted to go with the standalone, it's not going to be an issue to play the games. Just keep in mind you're going to get that black and white palette instead of this green and black palette. One of my favorite systems to play on the RG28XX is GBA. This is the standalone emulator. We've got some scaling options here. And this is just really easy to access. We can go to 1:1, obviously gonna bring it down. There's also an overlay, which we've got a smaller screen, so it doesn't make much sense. Even though in full screen mode we're not at the exact GBA aspect ratio, this is how I've been using the device just to take advantage of as much screen as possible, because after all, we're not working with a big screen in the first place. With the standalone and Sonic Advance 2 or 3, I noticed once you get up to speed, it does give us a couple slowdowns here and there. So the RetroArch core, in my opinion, is definitely where it's at. I mean, it's going to be full speed all the way through. Checking out some PS1 emulation, I'm just using the standalone for this one and I haven't run into any issues. Even something like Bloody Roar 2 runs at full speed on this device. A lot of people complain about not having analog sticks with PlayStation 1, but you gotta keep in mind, analog sticks on the DualShock controller actually released later on in its lifespan. We played a lot of these games with the D-pad when it was originally released, so most of this stuff is gonna work fine. I went through and tested some games with Final Burn Neo, so this will cover CPS 1, 2, 3, Neo Geo, and we're getting really good performance here. Of course, it doesn't take much to run this, but in the past we have run into these little devices kind of being sluggish, especially with some Neo Geo stuff. And to my surprise, I mean, when it comes to N64, you're going to have a lot of these games covered. Again, we don't have an analog stick on this device, but that D-pad has really good roll, so I mean, it could definitely dub as kind of an analog style stick with a lot of the games. Now, it's not going to run every single N64 game at full speed. You will run into a few issues, and with some games, you may need to do a little configuration from RetroArch, but so far, I'm pretty impressed with the N64 performance this thing's putting out. And when Anbernic first introduced the H700 CPU in their handhelds, one of the most impressive things was Dreamcast emulation using Flycast. This kind of transfers across the board with Atomiswave and Naomi, given that it's using the same core. Dolphin Blue here has given me a few slowdowns here and there, but overall it's a pretty playable experience. And the last thing we need to test out here is the D-pad. It is a bit smaller than I like, but it is using that conductive membrane underneath. It's got some good roll, a little bit of spring back. It's not crazy and going to give you some weird inputs when you let go of the D-pad. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely pull off your favorite special moves in these fighting games. We've got Marvel vs. Capcom 2 using the Dreamcast emulator here. And playing these fighting games is awesome with this thing, but you will have to get used to the size of the D-pad. So overall, for an ultra-portable retro gaming device, I do love what they've come up with here, but I kind of wish they would have added a little lanyard latch right here. That way we could use a lanyard with this. And over the last few years, we've seen some micro handheld devices hit the market. Most of those, in my opinion, are kind of novelty. This is teetering on the really small side, but I don't think it's a novelty product. It performs really well, and you can fit this in your pocket, basically carry it anywhere with you, and play your favorite games on the go. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I wouldn't make this my main handheld, but this is kind of a secondary unit I can carry with me everywhere. So yeah, over the past few days, I've been really enjoying the RG28XX, and if you're interested in learning a little more, maybe picking one up, I'll leave some links down below, but that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.